August 1940. The skies above Britain are burning. Dozens of German bombers cut through the clouds, and only a handful of RAF pilots stand in their way. Among them, a 22-year-old outsider. Pat Hughes, an Australian farm boy turned fighter ace, launches skyward in a Supermarine Spitfire with no backup, no fear, and no time to think. What happens next will cement his name in legend and leave his squadron watching helplessly as his plane spirals into the once idyllic British countryside. This is the story of the Spitfire's greatest hour, the Battle of Britain's forgotten hero, and the ultimate sacrifice made by a pilot who didn't even need to be there. Before the 1930s, the British air strategy revolved around a simple but fatal assumption: the bomber will always get through. The idea was that any war would be won not by defence, but by swift retaliation. Waves of British bombers striking deep into enemy territory. It was deterrence by destruction, not unlike the Air Doctrine that was prevalent during the Cold War many years later. But by the end of that decade, the illusion was fading fast. Across the Channel, Hitler's Germany was rearming at a terrifying speed. Swastika-stamped fighters were rolling off the factory lines, with the Luftwaffe bombers filling the skies, and British intelligence began whispering of something unthinkable: a direct assault on Britain itself. Suddenly, it wasn't a question of if enemy bombers would come, but when. Britain was no longer preparing for war, they were now preparing to be bombed. So Britain scrambled to rewrite its Air Doctrine. One half of the plan was grounded, a sprawling network of anti-aircraft guns to defend key cities and ports. But the real game changer was what the RAF called the Aircraft Fighting Zone, a 30-mile belt inland from the coast where squadrons of fast, agile fighters would intercept incoming bombers before they reached their civilian targets. This was a bold new strategy, so therefore they would need bold new machines. So in 1934, the Air Ministry issued Specification F730, a request for a cutting-edge day and night interceptor. It would have a speed not less than 195 miles per hour at a height of 15,000 feet. It would also have a heavy armament of 4 machine guns, a quick climb rate, and tight maneuverability, essentially the perfect bomber interceptor. A staggering 8 companies submitted a dozen designs, but only 3 would ever make it to the prototype phase. Of the notable companies, there was Bristol, who entered 2 versions. The Type 123 was a biplane, and a wobbly one at that. Lateral instability ended it fast. The Type 133 also looked promising until it flat spun during a test flight, with the landing gear down, and then it would crash. Game over. Blackburn's F3 was a weird bird, a single bay biplane with mismatched wings and a mid-mounted top wing stuck halfway down the fuselage. The Air Ministry liked it enough to build a prototype, but it suffered damage during a taxi test and overheated constantly. It was another one grounded for good.
Hey, Future Nick here doing the edit right now, and I just can't get over the wing design of this plane. I've never seen a biplane that's actually had the bottom wing put underneath. Isn't that crazy? Hey, don't forget to subscribe.
Westland's F730 started as a monoplane, powered by the shiny new Rolls-Royce Gosh Hawk engine. It was fast on landing, but they had to slap on a second wing to slow it down, turning it into a biplane. But even then, it couldn't meet the RAF's performance standards. And one by one, all of these projects fell away, outclassed, unstable, and simply out of touch. And this is where our hero of the story enters the fray. Aviation designer R.J. Mitchell of Supermarine, until then only known for racing seaplanes, entered the fray with an unconventional monoplane design, the Supermarine Type 224. This prototype featured an open cockpit, a fixed landing gear, and gull wings powered by a 600 horsepower engine. A fantastic combination that got it to the prototype phase. Now, the Air Ministry only asked for 3 planes, but rival Gloucester, who had been watching the contest on the sidelines, realised that they didn't need to enter with a brand new design, but could instead just update the Gauntlet fighter and potentially win the contract, sweeping it from the eyes of their rivals. And thus, they privately built a prototype called the Gloucester Gladiator. So it was the Supermarine Type 224 versus the Gloucester Gladiator at the last minute, and the hero proved underwhelming. Its performance disappointed Mitchell and the RAF, the latter who would ultimately choose the more traditional biplane, the Gloucester Gladiator, to fulfill the contract F730. But far from giving up, Mitchell and his team went back to the drawing board, leveraging their experience from Supermarine's record-setting Schneider Trophy seaplanes to reimagine the Type 224 into something far more advanced. They would come back with a new design called the Type 300. This was sleek, fast, and built to fix the clunky mistakes of the earlier prototype. It had a retractable undercarriage, a full enclosed cockpit, and critically, it would be powered by the Rolls-Royce brand new Merlin engine. Around this time, the Air Ministry saw the writing on the wall that the era of biplanes was coming to a close, and they returned to re-evaluate monoplanes, which was perfect timing for Mitchell to present his new version of his aircraft. Whilst the Air Ministry did hesitate, Mitchell pushed hard and they eventually handed over £10,000 to build a prototype. But it is interesting to note that Mitchell's design was so compelling that the Air Ministry funded it before they actually issued the final specifications. F-3734 was actually tailored after the fact to fit the promising design. This was rare and showed how much they believed in the concept. Around the same time, a chap named Captain Gunnar Hill dropped a bombshell report. They found out that modern fighters would need 8 machine guns to bring down a new modern bomber. Mitchell didn't even blink, and he redesigned the Spitfire to carry 4 Brownings in each wing. It was a bold call, but one officer later said that this new 8-gun setup may have literally won the Battle of Britain before it even began. And the final touch, coming up with the name. Spitfire was suggested by the Vickers director after his fiery daughter. Mitchell reportedly hated the name, calling it the sort of bloody silly name that they would choose. But too late, it stuck. On the 5th of March of 1936, the prototype took off with the test pilot Mutt Summers at the controls. After 8 minutes in the air, he landed and famously told the engineers, "Don't touch anything." And just like that, the Spitfire was born.
Do you want to own a piece of the Pat Hughes Spitfire and carry it with you every day? In 2020, the Spitfire Mk1A X4009 was recovered and donated to the Hunter Fighter Collection. And we're restoring it back to its 1940s condition and also making it flyable. But we need your help to do this, and partnering up with the amazing REC Watches to make this piece of legend take its rightful place in history. This is one of the coolest opportunities that I've ever had the pleasure of seeing on the channel, and I am so excited to bring it here with you today. Called the X4009 series, after the plane, the Spitfire watch comes in several colors: Sinatra Black, Midnight Blue, Hunter Green, and Anthra Grey, which is the exact one that I'm wearing. Not only is it made from the aircraft's original fuselage aluminium, its designers are reimagining of the classic Dirty Dozen watches worn by RAF pilots during World War II. It features bold Arabic numerals, luminous hands and markers, and a shatterproof crystal that is just cool, and I'm geeking out over its engineering. But it's not just that. REC Watches also has a whole bunch of watches made from other machines, such as a DeLorean, the SR-71, which I've already featured on the channel, and even a Formula 1 car, so you totally have to click that link to check them out. But I don't come empty-handed. Using my code, you get 10% off this watch or any of the other watches on the site, including the ones that are on pre-sale. So if you're looking for a present for yourself or someone you love, use my code. But act fast, because they're not exactly making any more Pat Hughes Spitfires, so if you want a piece of legendary history, you need to get it today.
The Spitfire wasn't just pretty, it was an aerodynamic cheat code. At the heart of its performance was that elliptical wing. Clean, elegant, and engineered like a work of art, it minimized drag while still being thick enough to hide the landing gear, ammo, and even 8 Browning machine guns. Beverly Shenstone, the aerodynamicist behind it, called it theoretically a perfection. Critics said that it looked like a German Heinkel. It wasn't, it was British brilliance, and it just happened to look good while doing it. Underneath the skin, it was also clever too. The wing structure used sort of a metallic telescoping leaf spring spar, rigid D-shaped leading edges, and a ballast tank-style wheel wells that folded outward, giving the plane a narrow stance on the ground, which pilots later discovered made it a bit squirrely on its landings. As one said, it was notoriously tricky to taxi or even take off without doing a pirouette. The body was all aluminium alloy and flush rivets, clean, tight and fast. And under the long nose, the mighty Rolls-Royce Merlin V12, a liquid-cooled 27-litre monster. Early versions pushed just over 1,000 horsepower, enough to send the Spitfire up to 350 miles per hour and climb like a rocket. Originally, the aircraft had a 2-blade fixed-pitch prop, but later they slapped on that 3-blade constant-speed prop and it got even faster. Able to climb at 2,900 feet per minute. But this engine had a party trick, or a flaw, depending on how you look at it. The Merlin wasn't fuel injected, so if you dove hard or pushed the nose down, the carburetor would flood or starve, causing a brief power cut. German Bf 109s didn't have that problem, so RAF pilots learned to roll upside down before diving to keep the fuel flowing. Eventually, an engineer named Beatrice Tilly Schilling came up with a simple metal washer that fixed the problem, and it was unofficially dubbed Miss Schilling's Orifice. Yes, that's RAF history for you. Then came the guns, 8 of them. Browning 303s, 4 per wing, that could fire over 140 rounds per second, though only for about 15 seconds before the ammo ran dry. At altitude, they would also sometimes freeze, especially the outer guns. Supermarine would actually solve this with heat ducts from the engine and those iconic red fabric patches on the barrels, which would blow off when fired. But the Mark I still had plenty of kinks. Early control surfaces were fabric covered, great in theory, but under high-speed dives the fabric would balloon, making rolls sluggish. Midway through the Battle of Britain, they switched to metal ailerons, instantly better. So yes, the Mark I Spitfire was fast, fierce, and finely tuned, but it also had quite the personality. It demanded a good pilot, and if you treated it right, it would dance through the sky and keep you alive for another day. The Spitfire wasn't alone. The Hawker Hurricane had also been built and even flown first and was already in production. This plane was easier to build, but the Spitfire was clearly the faster, sleeker thoroughbred. With some tuning, including a better propeller, the prototype hit 348 miles per hour, which was jaw-dropping in 1936. The Air Ministry was so impressed that they ordered 310 planes on the spot before the final testing was even done. The RAF loved it, the public loved it, and the only thing that didn't was the budget. Each Spitfire cost nearly £9,500, more than double the price of a Hurricane. A Hurricane was a working-class bruiser, and the Spitfire was a hand-built race car. That's about £600,000 per plane in today's money, and worth every penny, but Britain didn't care, they needed the best. By 1940, the government had poured over £15 million into Spitfire production, and that didn't even include the enormous new factory meant to mass produce them at scale. Supermarine's little factory at Woolston couldn't even keep up. But despite the promises to deliver 5 Spitfires a week, it took until mid-1938 for the first production model to even roll out. But with the help from Supermarine engineers taking control of the factory floor, by July, Spitfires were starting to finally pour out, and just in time, because the Battle of Britain had already begun. The Hurricane filled the early gaps, but when No. 19 Squadron finally got their Spitfires in August of 1938, the press and the public were hooked. The plane looked fast just sitting still, and just in time too because the storm was coming. Around this time, a young Australian pilot named Pat Hughes arrived in Britain, a fresh volunteer thousands of miles from home. Quiet, quick-witted, and deadly in the air, he would soon become one of the RAF's rising stars. And side by side, him and his Spitfire would form the last line of defence. After joining the RAF to, in his own words, do something special, Pat Hughes had worked his way up from flying Hawker Demons with No. 64 Squadron, leading to combat patrols in Spitfires with the No. 234 Squadron. Officially, he was only a flight leader, but historian Stephen Bungay later claimed that Hughes was the squadron's true commander, as the actual CEO, Richard Barnett, rarely flew. On July 8th, Hughes scored his first shared kill, a Junkers Ju-88 over Land's End, engaging a close range, 150 yards down to 50. That same month, he helped destroy another Ju-88, and on August 1st, he married the love of his life. Wow, that was a very busy month. This was just in time as the critical air battle over Britain's skies began in earnest at the end of July of 1940. During that campaign, the Spitfire finally earned its legendary status. And part of this was well earned because the Spitfire Mark I superior performance meant that its squadrons had lower losses and higher victory to loss ratios than some of the harder pressed Hurricane air units. But part of this was also due to the strategy employed by the fighter command. The sturdier, steadier Hurricanes were usually directed to attack incoming German bombers, whilst the quicker, more nimble Spitfires were tasked to tangle with the escorting Messerschmitt Bf 109 fighters. And this tactic paid off. The Spitfire pilots found that they could at least match the Bf 109Es in a dogfight, with their turning circle being tighter, and at medium altitudes the Spitfire accelerated and climbed on par with its German rival. Famous Luftwaffe ace Adolf Garland even professed admiration for the Spitfire. When Hermann Göring asked what he needed to win, Garland quipped that he would like a squadron of Spitfires. The Spitfire's only disadvantages were minor. The Bf 109 could dive faster, owing to its fuel ejection system, and the German 20mm cannon hit harder than the Spitfire's rifle caliber guns. Still, in determined hands, the Spitfire more than proved its worth. Between July and October of 1940, RAF Spitfires and Hurricanes together downed nearly 1,800 enemy aircraft, saving Britain from invasion. As technically the proposed Operation Sea Lion, which wasn't inherently hugely popular with the Germans, couldn't go ahead until the RAF had been destroyed. And our hero Pat Hughes had been using his new aircraft well. The next day, Hughes shot down a Bf 110 near the Isle of Wight, and on August of 16th, he claimed his first Bf 109, and by the end of the month, he downed another 9 enemy aircraft solo. By this time, he'd started getting even closer to his opponents, firing at a mere 30 yards. Everybody started calling him the Lucky Ace. On September 5th, he was credited with 2 109s, one of which was flown by the German ace Franz von Weber. The next day, he was forced to land after having his own canopy covered in oil from a damaged aircraft of one of his opponents over Dover. But 2 days later, his luck would run out. On September 7th, a new phase started in the Battle of Britain, with the German Air Command sending large bomber formations to attack London by daylight. Closing in with a Dornier Do-17, Hughes hammered the German bomber with his 8 303 machine guns, sending chunks flying off. What happens next is a little bit of a mystery. We don't know if the plane was shot down successfully or if chunks actually hit Hughes's aircraft as he was flying so close. Although one heroic take says that his aircraft ran out of ammunition or the guns jammed and he had to sacrifice his own plane to take out the bomber. But as this German bomber crashed, so did Hughes' Spitfire. That man who had dreamt of a flight since childhood was later found in a British garden. He was only 12 days away from his 23rd birthday. He was posthumously awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross, and with 14 confirmed kills and 3 shared, saying up to 17 confirmed kills, he would be the most successful Australian pilot of the Battle of Britain and one of the highest scoring Allied aces in the entire campaign. But this was the middle of a war, so there were no medals waiting, there was no parade, and there was no glory. His plane would come down in a quiet English garden, and his wife, pregnant and widowed within 5 weeks, would later miscarry, and his parents would receive the news of his wedding and his death in the same letter. And he was only 23 years old. But the Spitfire survived, and Britain would eventually endure. By the end of 1940, the RAF had done the unthinkable. It held the line, outgunned and outnumbered, against the full force of Hitler's personal air force. The Spitfire, once seen as a risky bet, was now the nation's symbol of defiance. And it didn't stop there. From the frozen coastlines of Norway to the burning skies over Burma, Spitfires would fly in every major theatre of the war. The original Mk1 would evolve into a whole new family. The Mk5, the Mk6, and some even monstrous Griffin-powered Spitfires that could top out at 440 miles per hour. With every upgrade, the Spitfire got faster, tougher, and more lethal. Some flew high-altitude reconnaissance missions, and others became dive bombers, and some were even modified for carriers and renamed the Seafires. Although Supermarine had explored naval Spitfire variants before the war, the original Spitfire was actually never meant for aircraft carriers. It was the war pressure that made them re-engineered for naval duty. Its long landing gear, long nose, and light frame made it a handful on the ground and a nightmare at sea, but war has a way of rewriting the rules. So in 1942, the Royal Navy took the RAF's finer fighter and gave it a tailhook. Although it was so notoriously hard to land that pilots joked that it was like trying to park a racehorse on a postage stamp. The Seafire would actually see real combat. It launched from British carriers in the Mediterranean, it flew in the Pacific against Japanese forces, and even provided air cover during the Normandy landings. Although without large fuel tanks, their operations didn't go far inland. Later versions, equipped with folding wings and beefed up gear, improved survivability and range, and some Seafires were Griffin-powered beasts, faster and meaner than anything the Germans ever faced. By 1945, at the end of the war, over 20,000 Spitfires had been built, each a variation on Mitchell's original masterpiece. However, it was a weapon that only worked because of the hands that held it, and no other Aussie flew it closer, faster, or more fiercely than Pat Hughes. The Spitfire didn't just meet the moment, it became the moment. And it was RJ Mitchell's genius that met history with perfect timing, and pilots like Pat Hughes that were there to fly it. And whilst that Aussie pilot never got his victory lap, every time a Spitfire soared, his legacy flew with it.
Thanks to RAC Watches for sponsoring this special video today. Don't forget to use my code to get 10% off this watch or any of the other watches on their site, including the ones that are on pre-sale. So get a watch for yourself or someone you love using my code. But remember, act fast, because like all of their machines, they're all legendary creations that are very limited. So this watch is going to run out very soon.